What if one of the greatest previews of Jesus in the Old Testament isn't found in a prophecy at all? What if it's found in the life of a man? Well, his name was Joseph, and his story takes us from a family feud to slavery to prison to a palace and ultimately to the rescue of an entire nation. And when we step back and look at Joseph's life, something remarkable appears. His story looks surprisingly like the story of Jesus. Joseph begins as the beloved son of his father, Jacob, and his brothers absolutely hate him for it. They're jealous, they're angry, and eventually they decide to get rid of him. They throw Joseph into a pit and sell him into slavery for silver. Now you think about the parallels: a beloved son, rejected by his own people, betrayed, and sold for silver. Centuries later, Jesus would also come as the beloved son of the Father. John tells us he came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. And one of Jesus' own disciples, Judas, would betray him for silver. Joseph ends up in Egypt, where things briefly seem to improve. Then he's falsely accused of something he didn't do. And where does an innocent Joseph end up? Prison. Again, think about Jesus. Falsely accused, condemned despite his innocence, punished even though he'd done nothing wrong. But Joseph does something remarkable through his suffering. He remains faithful. When Potiphar's wife tries to seduce him, Joseph refuses. He essentially says, "How could I do this and sin against God?" Whether Joseph is in his father's house, working as a slave, sitting in prison, or standing before Pharaoh, his circumstances change dramatically, but his character doesn't. Integrity, wisdom, faithfulness. Joseph continues trusting God even when his life makes absolutely no sense. And then everything changes. Pharaoh has troubling dreams that no one can interpret. Joseph is brought out of prison, and God gives him the interpretation. And Joseph warns Pharaoh that a devastating famine is coming. Suddenly, the prisoner becomes the prime minister. Joseph goes from the pit to the prison to the palace. He's placed second in command over Egypt and given responsibility for storing food. And when the famine arrives, Joseph becomes the means through which countless lives are saved. The rejected brother becomes the rescuer. The suffering servant becomes the exalted ruler. And that's where the picture of Jesus becomes even clearer. Jesus was rejected, Jesus suffered, Jesus was killed, but the grave was not the end. God raised him from the dead and exalted him. Paul says God highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name that's above every name. The rejected one became the Savior. But perhaps the most powerful moment in Joseph's story comes when his brothers finally stand before him. These are the men who hated him, betrayed him, sold him, destroyed years of his life. Joseph now has the power to crush them, but instead he forgives them. And he says something extraordinary. "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." That's one of the great truths of the Bible. God is so sovereign that he can take even the evil choices of human beings and accomplish his purposes through them. And nowhere is that more clearly demonstrated than at the cross. Human beings intended the crucifixion of Jesus for evil, but God used that very cross to accomplish the greatest good in history, the salvation of sinners. Joseph's story is ultimately a story of providence. Suffering becomes salvation. Betrayal leads to reconciliation, and evil does not get the final word. That's why Joseph is such a powerful picture of Christ. But Joseph is only the shadow. Jesus is the reality. Joseph provided bread during a famine. Jesus is the bread of life. Joseph saved people from physical death. Jesus offers salvation from eternal death. Joseph forgave the brothers who betrayed him. Jesus offers forgiveness to the very sinners whose sin sent him to the cross. So when life doesn't make sense, remember Joseph. When someone has wronged you, remember Joseph. When evil seems to be winning, remember Joseph. And then look beyond Joseph to Jesus. Because the gospel reminds us that God can bring redemption out of suffering. forgiveness out of betrayal, and even life out of death. For more of the biblical history related to this topic, please visit the link in the description, and don't forget to like and subscribe.